Oh, you got it. Okay, that's good.
There we go. Welcome to, what are we at? June 28th, meeting of the Finance and Legal Guild for the Lifeboat Academy. So we begin as we normally do by taking a moment to bring ourselves into the landscape, to bring the land in, and to ground ourselves all at the same time. So we start by acknowledging the land because the land was here before we were people. We only exist as people because the land thought it was a good idea for some reason. And everything that we know and experience comes to us through the land and returns back to the land. And we start with this reminder to start us off in a good place, to recognize our interconnection and our interdependence with all of our human relations and our more than human relations. And so I'm going to invite you actually to take a moment to literally ground yourself. So get yourself comfortable in your seat. You can close your eyes if that feels good to you. And I invite you to take a deep cleansing breath in, feeling cool, refreshing energy entering your lungs. On the exhale, just feel the weight of your body relaxing into the seat where you are. Feel the seat coming up to provide the support in equal measure. And take a moment to feel how that seat is supported by the floor, is supported by the structure of the building, is supported by the foundation, and nestled against the earth. Take a moment to feel the gentle hug of gravity holding you to the planet, the weight of your body in the chair. And take a moment to actually see in your mind's eye where you are in the landscape. Locate yourself in the room, in the structure, and the structure on the land. And take a moment to think what lies north of you and east of you and south of you and west of you. And take in another deep breath, drawing in your connections to all the relations, all those directions. And as you exhale, let go of anything that no longer serves you, any tightness, any stiffness, any distractions. Just let them go, releasing them to the wind. And when you are ready, I'm going to channel Ronnie. Take a moment to wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and move around in your body. And when you're ready, come back into the space and join us in the circle. So let's start with just a quick check-in and what's on your mind and how you doing and what's on your mind for today. So the circle as I see it is Roland, Becca, me. So Roland, over to you for a
Oh,
quick
yay, I
check-in.
get to start. Happy. I feel tired and I don't want it anymore. Over to Becca.
Oh, and what's on your mind for today for the meeting?
Oh, for today, um, yeah, I think I just want to get pulled into the conversation. Over to you, Becca.
Um, I am uh pretty good overall, but feeling a little bit discouraged about a few things today, and including the Democratic presidential incumbent and his odds of winning here after watching some of the debate with Trump last night. Um, and but I did get to go visit a farm yesterday that is about 20 minutes from here that is was recently purchased by a um local Hmong heritage activist and for like healing and ceremony and um mm, retreat and demonstration of traditional Hmong plants and lots of visions and it was kind of fun to see it was a little overwhelming the number of visions, but it was fun to be there and just sort of thinking about the relationship between that kind of project and Lifeboat and
Mhm.
um opportunities for cross-pollination and like she was talking about the relationship between the Hmong refugees and Native Americans and how to build that and like the difference between her nomadic people's tradition and how they're related to land as stewards but not as owners and how that anyway there was just a lot of resonance with what I think we're talking about, so that was nice. And for today, this meeting, I think I'm just curious to see if we can keep making progress towards what the legal structure or structures that we need. Over to you, Ben.
How am I doing? It's gray. My moods are I feel like I am almost wired to reflect the weather in my mood. And so it's gray, so I feel gray. Um, the sun will then come out and I will feel sunny. And uh I am also it's been a weird week, a good week, but there's been some pieces of information downloaded that but not processed yet. We had our 6 conversations on Tuesday that was dissent, and it was really good, I thought. Um, it was people in the group that I've had lots of conversations with, and it felt like a kind of hearing things for the first time, seeing, like there were elements that had been hadn't really been brought forward in the same way. Anyhow, and it's good and challenge. It's the challenge of looking at sort of the shadow side of things, like the value in being able to kind of do that, from this side and from that side. Um, and I read an article that is still disturbing me, another article that was sort of disturbing in its mundaneness about the way collapse unfolds. And they were talking about sort of the 4 waves of collapse: environmental, economic, political, and then biocapacity. Um, and given the fact that we have an avowed fascist who's, preaching revenge and punishment, who is still in the running. Like, that even if it was a shoo-in that Biden was going to win, the fact that there's even a contest at this point is really disturbing. And I think I'm trying to sort of process the reality of, and my frustration is in, talking about legal forms and things like that, is like the clock is ticking and things are coming, and it's so frustrating. I know you can't push a rope, and how do I push that rope? So anyhow, that's where I'm coming from, is this sort of like um a sense of the urgency and a frustration with being able to, budge people and in large numbers. I mean, I don't feel yeah, it's that kind of how do we take what we have and create a critical mass out of it, and yeah, how do we move it all forward? So that's where I am starting at. And yeah, I think talking about the legal structure is really the main thing on the list. And so I think I would propose that we just get to it, and probably especially for the purposes of the video audience, I think sharing the diagram that I sent out and using that as sort of a basis for discussion, and actually really starting, Becca, with your feedback, your questions and observations. And so let me share screen here with, hang on, I've got the wrong screen up. I was looking at a lot of the Miro boards that we have. We have somebody, our recently left woofer is interested in helping us with some social media stuff. And part of it was, what can we show her that lays out some of the plans that we had? And so I started looking through the Miro boards, and we've got all sorts of really interesting stuff on the Miro boards. And anyhow, it was kind of like a little bit of a stroll through memory lane. And it's also remarkable how consistent a lot of this stuff stays. So, okay, let me, here's the diagram that I put together. I think when we send out notes, I'll include the link to the board in the notes so everyone can access it. There is a talk track on the board, which is sort of in the upper, more or less in the upper left-hand corner. And the talk track is basically 15 minutes of me walking through the different elements of the board. I'm not going to do that at this point. And but I think that I will do like a 1 minute talking through the board. I think the basic idea is, and some of the things that I think have become a bit clearer in doing the diagramming, we can separate out the actual lifeboat and the community of supporters / investors that are focused on a local lifeboat, a local property, and a group of potential investors, sort of kickstart investors, social impact investors, who may have no particular interest in any one property, could have interest in multiple properties. And that's what we have been referring to as the social mortgage, is really the social impact investors. And the thing that we have been calling, I think in terms of terminology, we should start calling it a social impact mortgage, because it is riffing on the idea of a bond, a social impact bond, which is, the short form is that this is generally it's an investment made by a government that recognizes that in some ways they can save future costs by investing some money up front, either in prevention or more efficient ways of dealing with it. And so it's almost like, instead of paying your taxes 10 years from now, you pay your taxes now. And the government takes the tax money that would be required to be spent later, spends it now on something that actually saves money later. And so they're performance based. And
like tax incremental financing.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept as that. You're ultimately spending less money by spending some money up front as an investment. And as impact bonds, they are performance based. So there are criteria for, successfully achieving the bond. And in this case, what the criteria would be developing a parcel of land and a group of people into an actually functioning lifeboat with a community of support around it. So the bond is really to enable people to have access to their footprints, a parcel of collective footprints, in order to have the time to develop them as a lifeboat. And basically the development, the lifeboat is treated as a social enterprise. So it is revenue positive, and that can pay back whatever financial investments are made through the bond. So the fund, the social impact fund, is then sort of topped up and ready to either reinvest or for the investors to get their investment back, their original investment back. And but at that point, we have a functioning lifeboat that can also be as it's part of its profit sharing, can be investing in other lifeboats. And as more lifeboats come online, there are more people that can share some of their profit to help develop more lifeboats, and it becomes a sort of a self-generating system. And I think, and then the Lifeboat Academy, where that fits in, is it's really I think it's actually useful to think it's a support mechanism that, in an ideal world, the social impact investors would fund the Lifeboat Academy to support the teams that are developing lifeboats. So it would be a sort of a mutual, like an incubator. Actually, it's very much like a startup incubator, where you're not only providing the material resources, you're also providing sort of support structures, information, and processes that support increase the odds of the venture being successful. And but it's drawn the Lifeboat Academy, the people who are the mentors in the Lifeboat Academy are drawn from lifeboat builders. So they have direct experience of building lifeboats. And so I think that's a good enough for now sort of gloss on how this works. And what it means in terms of legal structure is that we have a number of lifeboats, which are physical properties with a local group of people who are committed to invested in that property. We have the social impact investors, which works like an investment fund, like an angel fund. The Lifeboat Academy, which is a peer-to-peer support system. And then it's the way I'm thinking of about it in legal structure terms is a co-op of co-ops. So if each of the lifeboats are a co-op, then there would be something like a land trust that they all belong to. And that's actually where you can leverage the little bit of profit that each of the lifeboats are sharing can then be, you get kind of economies of scale in the co-op of co-ops. I probably haven't rambled too much, so I'm going to stop with that. And let's just go once through the circle for questions, observations. So over to you, Roland. And you're muted.
I'm curious about the discussion topics that Becca provided. So I'm going to pass to Becca.
So you answered a couple of them, I think, but so, and maybe implicit was an answer to the first question about how do footprints connect, because you said at some point a functioning lifeboat. So I guess my question is, what is the definition, or what are the criteria for a functioning lifeboat, and is it sustaining the people who live on it part of that? And if so, I can see how the footprint is integral to that. And there might be other criteria too, that like physically sustaining, but also emotionally, and um, I don't know that that has to be in this presentation, other than maybe a reference to, you can drill down into that if you want to know what we mean by that. And I could go on, but why don't we stop there and we can talk about that one, and then.
Cool. Yeah, the lifeboat or the footprint, the relationship of the footprint to this model, it comes in a couple different places. The at the risk of making grand claims, in some sense, what I'm trying to create is a footprint-based economic system, as opposed to like one where the natural resources are seen as part of a commons, as opposed to one where the natural resources are seen as the enclosed assets of a subset of people. Basically, there's no rent in this model, or it's trying to create a situation where there's no rent. So I was also trying to think of a way in which you would incentivize people who have access to more than one footprint to make those footprints available in the system. Because anyhow, the way that one of the ways in which the footprint matters is that the shares in the high level, what we've been calling the Golem Trust, or the land trust, this sort of co-op of co-ops, the shares are based on footprints. And because what I'm proposing is, because that gives you a comparable measure of different lifeboats. And so if the local community has shares in the umbrella organization who owns the actual title to the land, then if you wanted to, you could easily convert your share in one footprint into, or your participation in one lifeboat would easily transfer to any other lifeboat, given sort of, negotiations with the local community about, do they have space available? But there would never be more people in the system than footprints to support them. So there would always be this ability of kind of shifting around what footprints you took access to once they were in the system. So does that make sense? That it provides a comparable measure between lifeboats, so that everyone's owning a relatively fair share, even though they're participating locally. They're owning a fair share in the network of lifeboats and participating in the local one. That makes sense?
Sort of, but I'm still confused about ownership, whether if the land is owned by a land trust in the traditional sense of that term, then people don't have shares in it, I don't think.
And it's not it's a land trust, but it is it's a land
It's a cooperative.
It's a cooperative, so you are in fact owning a share in the cooperative, but it acts like a land trust. So in part, this was inspired by that the Oregon stewardship model, where you can have sort of representatives of you can have an in perpetuity company, and people can sell their shares, so the people in the commons can trade and sell their shares, but to allow people to come into or exit the system. But the land itself is held as a trust. So, you know, the land in the system doesn't change, but shares can come and go. Shareholders can come and go. So
I
it's
don't,
access to the system.
I'm not sure we should call it a land trust if it's not what people are legally structured as what people are calling a land trust, because I think it's confusing.
Yeah. It's the, I mean,
And
it's the common landowner. I think that's the, you know, go ahead, Roland, sorry.
well, I'm thinking about so what is happening right now to start because in the in trying to use sociocracy, if there's an objection about something, then it isn't just voicing an objection, but it's also offering a solution. Otherwise we get into these conversations where it's like just answering questions. So if the idea of a land trust doesn't work, like as a um, uh, you know, the function of a land trust doesn't quite work, then what would be the alternative? The other thing that I wanted to say was I think that was a very good question that came up earlier. What's the criteria of a functional lifeboat?
Mm.
In falling into the system that we've created and that we're invested in until the next time we review it. The question then is which guild is best suited to tackle that question? If we don't already have a definition that's been accepted, which guild would be able um, to respond to that? So I'm just trying to bring us back to a form. Um, so back to you guys. And do we want to do circle or do we want to do popcorn? How do we want to have this discussion? So I don't know if we're in circle or popcorns. I don't know if I pass it on to Becca or we just leave it open.
Let's go once through the circle to answer the question, popcorn or circle. And then, so we'll use the circle to allow ourselves to popcorn if we want. Roland, it's you to pass to Becca to answer the question, popcorn or circle.
Becca, popcorn or circle?
I was aware that I was switching to popcorn. I'm sorry, I didn't say so. But I'm also happy to go back to circle if anyone prefers it at all. Over to Ben.
I'm good with popcorn. I think this can go back and forth. And I do like the question of I can answer the question about what are the criteria for a functional lifeboat.
Wait,
So
let's let Roland say his preference about popcorn first.
Thank you for processed water. Over to you, Roland.
I'm okay with popcorn and then being clear when we want to move out of popcorn and back into circle. So pop away.
Now I want popcorn. So let me answer the question about the functional criteria for the lifeboat. So this is where the social impact investors, as we, you know, if we think about the articles of incorporation that have been drafted, where do the different roles in that one document, where do they live? And the social benefit monitor part of, you know, the value of the B Corp approach lives in the social impact investors. So in some sense, they are both an investment arm, but also because they're the ones who are giving the money for an expected impact. So they define the criteria in the bond. And each of these bonds can be uniquely crafted to the local project. So the way I would, and which is very much, you know, that's a standard angel investment sort of process. You might have criteria that people need to meet to come in, but then they're always negotiated based on the particulars of the project. So the way I would see something like this working is, so the social impact fund is also what I think of as the research council. So, it's sort of like a research investment board as well, where they are looking for projects that are going to maximize resilience. What's the fastest way that we can develop community-based resilience, excuse me, in the face of the poly crisis? What projects do we think have the best, biggest impact? So the social impact investors would have a role in basically, articulating what they think the biggest benefits are that we need to be looking at. I would propose that they're the same benefits that we have articulated in our articles of incorporation. So food production, food sovereignty, local relationship building, et cetera, whatever the things are, biodiversity. But those are all things that the impact investors then would sign off on. Basically, what do the impact investors think the biggest, the most important criteria are? And then the development teams come in with a proposal to say, if we had 16 footprints, this is what we're doing here on the Spalding Valley Farm. If you gave us this property, what we would do with it would be, some of our income would be educational and for agritourism, some would be food production and this kind of food production. And then the bond, then in the back and forth between the proposal and the impact investors, you would say, well, what are the success criteria for that project? So each of them, each lifeboat could have slightly different criteria for success that could be negotiated in each of the bonds. But ultimately, the success would have to be what I've always considered the main research question: how do we maximize quality of life within a sustainable footprint, where the footprint is measured as a fair share footprint? So how do we maximize the quality of life with 16 fair share footprints? And then quality of life includes the material support and the social emotional support and cultural support. So that would be my answer to that question. So actually, do we want to do a circle or just pop on that? Pop away.
Yeah, well, so I think I think I would like to again question how we're meeting today. What's the purpose of the meeting, and are we going? So if I remember correctly from the last meeting, one of the things that we talked about was, in terms of the legal structure, we would be looking for something that is at the same time simple uh, and imparts confidence in the project. So those two things, and that there are a lot of details that are part of the project that we needed to hang somewhere else. So this is how I'm remembering it. So what do we need to be able to decide on a legal structure, and how can we have, and that part of that is, how can we keep it simple? And so is this something, or what we're talking about right now, is it something that will help us to figure out what this simple, confident legal structure is? It sounds to me like we're already talking about a cooperative. So are we talking about what kind of cooperative? So over to Becca.
I totally am resonating with the bringing us back to what's the simple, confidence inspiring thing that we can create to get this from concept into reality, or start moving in that direction. I don't want to make that sound like you all aren't doing things on the ground there, which you are very much. But to be able to invite more people into it, more money into it, I guess, is really the goal. it does. I left the last meeting thinking we were sort of narrowing in on a cooperative. This to me feels like it's more of a hybrid where there's a cooperative, a local cooperative that's a member of a cooperative of cooperatives, and a social impact fund that's got some kind of governance structure that's more like a B Corp, or a, that's more of the corporate model. So it's kind of one of those layered entities that might have multiple tax returns to file, multiple governance bodies that would have to interact and might be able to overlap considerably, but not completely. So I'm not sure if I'm hearing that correctly. Over to Ben. Or
Yeah,
popcorn.
I think my take on it, and I think it's a little bit the Winston Churchill quote of, if you want me to speak for an hour, I can do it tomorrow. If you want me to summarize, if you want me to speak for 10 minutes, it'll take me some time to prepare. And what, from my perspective, with limited vision, the Articles of Incorporation as currently drafted are a single entity that could either be a B Corp or a co-op, it doesn't matter. And it does all of this. It's a single organization where what I did was I blended the social impact investor is just a type of share, right? That basically, rather than having this impact investors hold the mortgage until such time as the footprint, as the lifeboat proves itself, and then the title is transferred over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, they just buy share. They buy all of the shares in the organization. And likewise, this commons land co-op, whatever we want to call that, it is simply the stewardship council making decisions, kind of separating out the roles of those land, what's the overall best use of the land, rather than creating a separate organization. In the Articles of Incorporation, it's just part of the process. So the Articles of Incorporation provide a single organization that does all of this. That seemed to cause a lot of confusion. So pulling out the different functions and saying it could be a separate organization and a separate organization, so that the roles and responsibilities and are clearer. It's just more clearly laying out the same. None of this is new, right? None of this has added anything to what we have been talking about the entire time. The only thing is that some of the terms are changed because they're most like this other thing. So in terms of the simple and complex part of it, I was seeing the diagram as just a way of exploding what's already it's already part of the conversation. So like nothing here is new. It's just a different way of representing it. So, and I was assuming that would be of value, because then, like, it didn't occur to me that the social impact investors would be a B Corp. But now that having said what I just said, I'm like, oh, right, that kind of makes sense that might be like a B Corp, because that's what it's all about. And, and that the land co-op is a co-op of co-ops, and that the local ones are all individual co-ops. And maybe that's, sort of the right form. We've got three organizational types, and then we can add in as many lifeboats as we want, because they're generating. And also that would mean that these local lifeboat co-ops would not be land owning, right? So they would just be a community co-op, right? They wouldn't have any assets that they would need to be managing in a direct legal way. So they would probably be the simplest things to set up. These two would be the more complicated entities. anyhow, those are just my thoughts on the simple versus complex part. Likewise, that's this the time bank part here it's built in already, and it's just a way of saying, I think the only thing that really kind of got added in the diagram about the time banks is that with more than one lifeboat, we could create a commons market where hours between the time banks are exchangeable. And that just sort of opens up opportunities for how the people within the lifeboat network could operate in a parallel economic system that is, completely off of the commodity system. So over to you, Roland.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm something else that I am recalling that was at least part of the discussion was uh, sort of steps or gradations. So what do we need to set up and talk about now? And is it all of this? So are right now, in terms of setting up a legal structure, are we talking about the AKA social mortgage? Do we also talk about the commons slash land trust idea, or is that sort of a future project? So if it's a future project, then can we focus on just setting up the first legal entity and can leave that? I think that's part of what what I'm exploring is what can live elsewhere for now, and what do we need to focus to be able to focus on to be able to start? And to me, it sounds like it is looking at the idea of the social impact bond and what kind of legal structure do we need to be able to have something like that. Over to you, Becca.
Yeah, I think having the bigger picture available to explain to people when they ask questions is good, and focusing in on what's the piece or maybe two pieces that we need to get started, because we might need more than the social impact bond, because we might need to say, and the first investment that we're planning is in Badumpum, and it's this piece of land that will be stewarded by this entity. So that entity needs to have a legal status in order to flow. It needs to have bank accounts, it needs to have employees, it needs to have governance, and the governance of that needs to relate to the governance of, or maybe it's one thing. And I feel like we probably are spinning our wheels a little bit because we're reluctant to spend money on the lawyers, and that we should go back to conversations with the lawyers pretty darn soon. I mean, I'm not sure that, I think it's important for our group to be on the same page, so I'm not as much as possible, but I'm not sure that we need a lot more amongst ourselves before we go back to them. Because in order to actually, I mean, there's probably always going to be this tension between the world we want and the world as it is, and how far can we push the legal structures as they are in the direction of what we want. But I don't think we can know that without talking to the lawyers. And we could say, okay, these aren't the lawyers for us because they're not, willing to go far enough, but I'm not sure that we've had enough conversation with them to make that judgment. Over to Ben.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both of you. And I feel like um that is what I think is most useful. For me, what was most useful was actually kind of plopping out a few of these things. And I didn't think much about sequence, but as soon as I do, it is the impact bond. And if this support community part, that's a co-op, right? Like that's a co-op, it's a community services co-op to look after a parcel of land. And if that, um, and really, I think it is, what's the deal? What is the agreement between the people who invest in that parcel of land and its ultimate ownership and the community of people who want to tend and develop that land? And so it does seem like the first two legal entities are, and I actually don't even know if no, I guess we do need a legal entity that are the investor group. And we don't really need to think about the co-op owning the the land trust or whatever part of it, I don't think. So yeah, maybe it is time to go back to the lawyers and say, this is what is the starting point, is there are the impact investors who say, here's a piece of land available to you for 10 years with these expectations. And here's a group of people who say, we're going to take that on. And like Becca's saying, it has the ability to have a bank account and, you know, and make some choices. So yeah, maybe we're ready to, it almost, I also like this idea, and this is one of the things I said in terms of representation, presentation. You know, we could, um, we could make separate charts. We could have one that is just like step one. Social impact investors create first bond for first parcel with first co-op. Step one. And then step two, bond is complete and a separate, a third organization that holds the title is created. And step, three, whatever, we could kind of make it like a cartoon to keep it simpler. And then only, have in the background, we could have the whole detail-y bit, but, find ways of just pulling out one thing at a time. So it kind of feels like we are, maybe it sounds like we might be agreed enough that it's time to sit down with the lawyers again. Question mark, Milan?
Uh, okay. I'm not, I, this will be a part of the video that I will likely cut out because it's just me bumbling. Um,
You can't edit to make you look good.
yes, I can. If I'm doing the editing, you know it. Okay. I think, yes. I'm still not clear about what this first part is, and what are we going to be talking to the lawyers about? You know, yeah, I think I'm still not entirely sure. Are we agreed on, are we going to be talking to the lawyers because we want their help in figuring out what the legal structure ought to be, or have we decided on a legal structure that we want to bounce off of them?
Hmm.
Over to Becca.
Um, so yeah, I was gonna say, if you think that that's a community support cooperative, let's call it that, or whatever, yeah, the name is. Thank you. He reads my mind. I think that we might need to create all three entities at the beginning? Because who owns the land if we don't? If there's is there a phase one where somebody else owns land other than the umbrella cooperative?
Yeah, the social impact investors would hold the land. They would even with the elaborate model, the social impact investors would hold the title of the land against performance on the bond. Right. So that's the social impact investors would always be the temporary landlord while the social impact bond is being acted on. So the reward for performance on the bond is that the social impact investors hand the title back to whoever.
And at that point, whoever could be the co-op. The
Could
co-op
be the
of
co-op, or it could be a third entity.
Is it okay to popcorn back and forth a little bit on this?
Yeah.
Jumping. So hypothetically, if one social impact investor were to say, I'll buy the land,
Mhm.
that person would own the land
Mhm.
and be leasing it or something
Mhm.
to the community services cooperative.
Mhm.
If it takes more than one investor to come up with the money for the land, then we need some kind of limited liability corporation or something to hold the land.
Mhm.
Um, and either way, we need to know what the governance relationship, how the governance relationship works, that needs to be spelled out. Maybe in bylaws, not articles of incorporation. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of concern about people with wealth having the kind of power that people with wealth have in
Mhm.
our society and how to mitigate that. So I think we need to talk to the lawyers about, I don't know, just thinking out loud, but maybe we have a conversation with the lawyers about this is our big picture. Maybe they don't need to know about the time banking part.
Right. Yeah.
It's internal, but and maybe we simplify the diagram so that it's doesn't necessarily include, or maybe we go back to their diagram and we say, here's what I don't know, I haven't looked at it in a while, but here's what we're thinking. Help us make this kosher. And tell us where, what we're not seeing about, do we need more than two entities right now?
Mhm.
Do it in one entity somehow,
Mhm.
like a community services cooperative with investors. Maybe it's just one entity to start with, which would be
Mhm.
great, right?
Mhm.
Over to Ben or whoever.
Yeah, I think there may be and I'm more and more leaning towards, yeah, it's time to talk to the lawyers, because I think and it might be like, I agree. I don't think we need to worry about the time banking part yet. Like, that seems by law-y, internal, kind of thing. Um And it may very well be because social impact investors, in some sense, are like a benign um, land development consortium, right? So people that are going to say, we'll make this totally a more commercial model, sort of mainstream commercial model. Instead of a lifeboat, we are developing a timeshare community. And there's going to be investors who initially buy the land and finance the construction cost and the planning and all of that. And they probably are going to say, you know, their land development contract or investment is in the next X years, you know, we are going to invest this much. And at the end of that time, we expect something back, right? And at that point, then it usually gets, it's like your Roland, your parents and the the
Yeah.
villager thing. You know, like you have there's a pre-mortgage entity that comes together, a development entity, and they're designed from the beginning to sunset. So, you know, people invest and then things happen and then it's transferred to somebody else. So this is in some sense exactly like that. If we thought it's not a lifeboat, it's a timeshare resort community. And there are going to be some people who back it ahead of time, but then the goal is at the end, we're going to sell timeshares, right? And we're going to, you know, that's going to get transferred over to other people. So there's an interim phase where you have a development team that are, you know, working on all of that stuff, and you've got investors who are planning on stepping out of it. And I think all of that, though, is we can say, you know, it kind of works like this, and the lawyers can say, like, I'm imagining there's going to be, if you have more than one investor, then you need a legal entity, you know, some sort of limited liability way for those investors to come together. And the big deal is separate from that is, I bet there is a contract, this 10-year contract about performance. And that's really what we're talking about, is sort of like a performance contract that another legal entity has to be able to take on. So, you know, for the contract to have two parties, there needs to be a development organization and there needs to be an investor organization, and they have a contract between them. And but that's, I think, where the lawyers can come in, because, you know, do we need, those are all legal questions, you know, like beyond my pay grade, as Heather says. But I think being able to kind of point to that model at the high level, there's investors, there's a parcel of land, there's an agreement about what the development looks like, and then go. And at the end of that point, at the end of that development, then it's going to transition where the ownership will move from the investors to the organization that follows the development phase. So I'm going to pass over to Rolanda, and I'm also going to go do a quick bio break, and I'll be right back.
Well, it just sounds like now we just need to work out what to send to the lawyers and how we want to talk to them. It feels, and because I was thinking earlier about, you know, one of the things that we were doing with Pender Earth was, you know, you can have a really big project, but what can you do in the next 3 months, for example? So breaking it down into chunks. Yeah. And I feel like that would be a way. We were talking earlier this morning about compartmentalizing things is completely an illusion, and yet at the same time, it can be a useful tool to be able to break down the interaction understanding of a really complex thing. So I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for being able to put things into compartments in my mind so that the whole living thing can function. Yeah. So over to you, Becca. Chit chat too if you want.
I'm wondering if we could either give me screen sharing so that I can, I just pulled up the diagram from the lawyers. And I think it would be useful to look at their diagram and talk about how is this different or similar to what they came up with in preparation for meeting with them. So I've already called it up. So if you want to enable me to screen share, or if you want to find it and screen share it.
Yeah, I'm not signed in as Ben right now, so I can't.
He made you co-host though.
Did he?
I think I saw something fly by, but
Okay. So can I do the same thing? Mhm. Okay. So I don't know how to. Oh, multiple participants can share simultaneously for the screen sharing. Does that work?
um
Do you need me to stop share?
um let me just see if I can share the right screen here. I've got too many screens open here. I think this is the one. Except now I've got this Zoom bar in the way here. Okay. Are you sure? Are you seeing my screen?
Mhm.
Yep.
Are you seeing the one that has their diagram?
Mhm.
Yep.
Because I was saying, Ben, while you were away, that I think it would be good to compare, to look at their diagram and say, okay, how is this different from what we're envisioning? So that when we talk to them, we could say, like the idea of breaking it down, could we make this one a co-op, etc.
Mhm.
Because I think they're saying their holdco owns land, sole shareholder slash owner of operations companies, receives revenue from operations, pays out dividends. Board supervises. So they're envisioning multiple entities. Where the opco is basically what they're calling opco is owned by the holdco.
Mhm.
So instead of having a loan fund or social impact bond fund that's an entity, they're calling this thing a holdco that could itself be a cooperative or a corporation. So I think if we did something this simple, but with, you know, the entities that we were just talking about and compared the two, or even mapped it onto this same one, it would help in the conversation with the lawyers.
Mm.
Yeah, can we take the language um, from ours and replace the language that they have, but use the categories that they've created as a way of um, harmonizing the two, of bringing the two together.
And I think part of the challenge, though, is this is where this is very static, right? The investors are directly investing in the holding company, which has direct management oversight of the operations, which is exactly not what we want, right? So the investors are going to have undue influence on the operations. And the difference is that this is maybe the phase 2 model if we replace investors in the left-hand side and instead say successful lifeboats, right? Then successful lifeboats
Mm,
titles go to Holdco, and then this is more like the Golem Trust or that umbrella co-op,
yeah.
and that might work, like this. Um, yeah, actually, and it would. All of the operating companies would sort of be owned by. That would be how your shares would be transferable, because you would have shares in the parent company, and it would transfer down to the local operating company.
So for
So
phase one, before there are functioning lifeboats that can replace the investors, what does that what does this look like? Is this actually the starting place? And
no,
then
that's what I'm saying, is that it's not the starting place. So we need a different diagram for the starting place.
okay.
Because I think basically we need to add something in, where between the investors and Holdco, there's something missing. And that's our diagram, is the transition phase. Investors go to InvestCo, those investments go into land development company, which then is a short-term performance bond. That's the difference, is that the investors are in it for the short term, not the long term. And so that's a different loop for them. But I mean, I agreed with the basic idea here, is like, if we can overlay what we're talking about onto this, um, and the only difference is that I think they're thinking about, because we've been talking primarily about this entity that owns the land. In this model, I think it assumes a single piece of land owner, a single piece of land being owned, and a single operating company. But there would actually have to be multiple parcels and multiple operating companies, one for each parcel. Anyhow, I think we can, if we, it sounds like what's really desired here is something simpler. So I think we can boil down the diagram that we've been working, and maybe it may also just be talking it through with them, uh, using the same diagram and saying, we really want to focus on, this is step one. This right here is the core part.
I'd like it to be simple enough that we can compare it to theirs
Hmm.
and say what we're concerned about and what you presented is the undue influence of people with wealth. Would it work to do it this way instead? Or is there a way in your model to do it that doesn't give the people with wealth undue influence
Mm-hmm.
or standard amounts of influence?
Mm-hmm.
Can we
Right.
democratize it?
Right. Can
Um,
everyone have shared influence?
So
yeah.
if I understand, you're saying that there's something missing between the investors and Holdco.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we'd be proposing something for and
Mm-hmm.
discussing, is
Mm-hmm.
that it's in between those two categories.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, it seems to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe.
It's sort of workable.
It's workable. Yeah.
I mean, is there a way to set up Holdco so that it's basically governed the way we're doing governance now? And the investors have a say, but they don't dominate it. Would be a question I would ask the lawyers. Like,
Mm.
if you help us incorporate the Holdco in your model and the OpCo in your model, who controls those two entities in
Mm-hmm.
reality? And is there a
Mm-hmm.
way to? Because
Yeah.
I don't actually think that we want to set up an investment bond fund if we can get away without it, because we don't know how to manage that. We don't know how to set
Mm.
that up. who would be in charge of it, like who would run it, who would govern it. Like that's a whole area of expertise that we don't have in our wheelhouse.
Mm.
And so if there's a way to set it up that allows people with wealth to invest in what's already happening rather than a whole separate entity, I think it would be better. But I think we need to discuss it with the lawyers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of my concerns too is in that same sort of influence and control. You know, I'm trying to set up something that is a distributed model where local, you know, the local like I don't think Holdco receives revenues from operations. They don't. The Holdco receives either a profit share or they receive rent that should be managing. But in even that's the other thing too is that you know, in the way that I've got the model set up, there is an element of profit sharing that goes from the local to the umbrella organization. So the umbrella organization is not dictating the rent, because that's also, you know, that it's not just with the investors, there's also the centralization problem of the main organization placing uniform requirements on the local operations rather than letting the local operations have as much latitude as possible with criteria in mind, right? Like, so there it's still like a performance requirement, but that it's not a pyramid, right? It's not like Holdco then dictating to each of the local communities, this is what you have to do, and this is what we expect of you, and send us your money and we'll send some back to you. Instead, you know, we want to kind of localize what's going on. But I think those are all quibbles of, you know, it's just sort of like which bullet points go in which box, right? You know, kind of thing.
And also it depends on who's governing and how the governance is done, whether that's a problem or not.
Right.
So if if Holdco is basically you guys with a bunch of us brain trusts and some of Joey's friends who are, you know, don't have any more power than anyone else, it wouldn't be so bad. But I think, and I'm not saying I'm not opposed to showing the lawyers your whole diagram and your whole talk track, except probably leaving out the time banking
Yeah.
stuff. I'm just saying the simpler it is, the less we'll spend. But if we need to talk through, we need to talk through the ideas, like here's what we want, that may be different from what you're diagramming, then we need to spend the money on it. Because otherwise nothing's going to come of this whole project if we don't get the legal documents. So let's spend the money to do it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, and it's also, it makes me think, and part of that harmonizing is whatever they have here on this diagram, well, especially the bullet points in the middle, what box do those go in, right? Because even if we use mine or theirs, we still need to address those, you know, whose board supervises management, who receives revenue. You know, how does that work? So that all makes sense.
So should we look at our calendars and figure out whether we want to try to invite them to our next meeting? Or do we want to look at another version of your diagram before that?
I mean, I would go with let's just set up a meeting.
Okay.
You know,
what are we looking at?
The 12th of July.
I'm going to.
I think we're still seeing your screen, Becca.
Oh.
Although not really. It was just a weird blurry image.
You were seeing my calendar?
Well, kind of. It was so blurry, it was hard to, what I saw was just a sort of an oblong.
Yeah, it was actually what you were sharing, but skewed and blurred. It
Weird.
was still
Okay.
the lawyer's diagram.
And okay, so should we look at the 12th, July 12th would be our next meeting?
Yeah, yeah, that works for me. Oh, no, it doesn't work for me. I'm going to be doing a retreat that weekend, or that for the 10th to the 12th. Oh, that's coming up quick.
Nice.
Could have remembered that.
Do we want to look at find some other times that work for the three of us and run them by the lawyers, or do we want to wait a whole month? That seems.
Yeah, let's
Oh, and yeah, I'm not sure I'm available on the 26th, so.
oops. So, my next 2 weeks. So the week of the 8th is pretty unavailable. But next week is largely available for me. And aside from, kind of occasional meeting here or there. And the week after, so the week of the 14th, 15th, is pretty much wide open. So those would be my
Okay, well,
yeah,
July 4th is probably not going to fly,
probably not. No.
which is why it's so open in my calendar.
Why it's got big arrows pointing towards it.
And Monday's probably too soon to get a meeting together.
July 1st? Yeah, July 1st is our
Oh,
July.
it's also a holiday here. Did we move the coordination circle to Tuesday? Oh, just for next week, I guess.
Because it's Canada Day.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
July 5th is probably not better than July 4th in terms of them being on vacation, but we can offer it to them. I'm here on the 4th or the 5th.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, we could. I agree though. I think it's sort of like, I think realistically we're probably looking at the week of the 15th.
Because you're not available the week of the 8th.
No, I could be available Monday, the 8th. But yeah, Tuesday through the
So let's offer some times on the 8th, because that's also good for me.
5th and 8th.
You're saying let's offer the 5th?
Why not? I guess,
Yeah, they can say no.
can
So
say
I'm
no.
available after 1 p.m. my time, which would be 11 your time on the 5th.
Me too.
Okay, and
Yeah, the 5th I'm available all day.
and the let's see, after 1:30 my time, 11:30 your time. The 8th, I'm available starting at 11 my time, 9 your time.
I would
Until
be available after, well, I would be available. I have a standing meeting that's at 10 that I could skip, but I would prefer after 11 my time.
okay, so 11 your time, 1 my time. And I've got something at 4. I'm available basically till 4 my time, which is till 2 your time.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a couple times, and maybe should we pick one more? The week of the 15th.
As far as I can see, we're wide open on the 19th.
Mm-hmm.
And we could, yeah, we already have the 15th.
But yeah, the 16th is pretty open. Oh, are you going to be doing the hub though on the 16th?
Yeah.
17th is busy.
17th is busy.
Okay, well, let's look at the 19th.
Yeah, wide open on the 19th.
Okay. So let's say 9 your time, 11 my time. After that. Okay, I will email them and CC you and I guess CC Heather also and see what we get.
Cool. Cool.
If you have time to work on paring that down a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I'll try to do like a phase 1. I think actually that might be the easiest thing to do is like a phase 1 and a phase 2.
Mm-hmm.
And probably good to have a phase 2 so you can say like what the transition would look like.
Yeah.
But I think I can do that pretty easy.
Cool.
All right, onward and upward. Should we
Check
do yeah, I was gonna say do a quick checkout. Well, where are things landing with you? Or yeah, what are you walking away with? And you can always pass over to you, Roland.
We have a next step. So that's good. Over to you, Becca.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the grounding at the beginning and I enjoyed the flow we got into near the end of just thinking together. So appreciate that.
Mhm.
Ben.
I like diagrams. I like diagrams a lot. And I feel like there's a part of me that wants to only ever use Miro boards for everything that we do from here on out, because I think it's also well, I'm reading about Aboriginal knowledge systems, and they're all based on stories and maps. And so that for me, it's like that diagram way of thinking. It's, this is over here and this is over here, and there's all this stuff here and there's all this stuff there, and works well with my brain. So that's what I'm walking away with. I like diagrams. So with that, onward and upward. So I guess is your holiday weekend next weekend for the 4th?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. Because this is the Friday before our holiday weekend here. So I will say happy holiday weekend and extended to next week. Happy holiday weekend and week.
Whenever it happens.
Thank
Right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.